The term macho comes from a word named, the root word of machis. Machis simply meant in the Nahuatl language to be known, but to be a reflection. And it was connoted in a positive way. That was to be a reflection of that which is good, to be respectful, to be connected to another person in a positive way, to be a protector, to be a person who instills spiritual values. And it was all embodied in that term machis, to reflect that. Macho was to be known for that. There's no resemblance to what young people perceive as being macho today. Now it's the exact opposite. We have flipped it over time. And I remember sitting there hearing these concepts, and all of a sudden it clicked for me. My grandfather was a rancher. My mother's father, who was the only grandfather I knew, my paternal grandfather died when my father was very young, so I never knew him. But my mother's father was a man that I did know. And one day we were riding to his ranch, and he was very proud of, both his cornfields and the cattle that he nurtured and raised. And so we were riding, and we stopped in this one place, and this man stopped us, and he was a man filled with bravado, but negative bravado. My grandfather was very respectful with him, and as we were getting ready, I made the comment, I said, ese hombre es bien macho, ¿verdad? And my grandfather, I said, my comment was, that man embodies machismo. And my grandfather said, that's not a hombre macho. He goes, he doesn't take care of his wife and his family financially. He doesn't take care of them emotionally. He's disrespectful. He's violent. And I had forgot that my grandfather had said that. Until one day I was in a discussion where they were actually talking about the positive aspects of machismo. And then it clicked. My grandfather was a man who had received the original teachings. And I wasn't learning them directly from him. It took much later to do that. So recognizing that in all our cultures, we have sometimes young boys that have been given what we call the false teachings of manhood. It's how much alcohol you drink, how much weed you can smoke, how many young women you can convince to have sex, how many women you can get over on. Those are the things that we need to be very cognizant in male involvement, that it's not just creating this positive thing, but sometimes deconstructing the negative that they've inherited over time as well. And it's not very easy when you have very prominent men kind of being brought out in public for their shortcomings as being, respectful partners to the people they claim they love. So young men, and we don't have those men that stand up, that get highlighted for actually being exactly what they want to be and what we expect men to be. We only hear the failures. Then the other part with young men was spirituality, is that there's no dimension of spiritual. MTV, no media introduces that concept. And so many programs would say, and the Office of Family Planning is like, well, hold on here. This is an Office of Family Planning project. We can't be. And when they would go into the field and they would recognize that for many of these young men, because there was an absence of connectedness to anything, there were components. I want to say, and I'm going to say it, it wasn't religiosity. There was no promotion. It was just a recognition that we as individuals have different dimensions, and you needed to discover which ones were the ones you were going to nurture or the ones you had ignored for some time. Very, very valuable. In addition to the core education that dealt with all those things that we did, some of the programs had 30-week sessions. And the state was like, well, you're not reaching as many guys because you have too many sessions. You need to cut it down to 10. Then you'll be able to reach 3 times as many or 2 times the number more. And the programs would say, in our community, we needed to do all of those 30 sessions. But in addition to that, they had contact with other adults, They would bring other adults, other adult men, to kind of embody what it is the goals of the thing. They provided reinforcement of messages by getting young men from one community interacting with other communities. And the young men would kind of realize, wow, you're learning the same thing. And they no longer felt that what they were learning was so odd because they met other young people that were doing this. And then if a guest speaker came, they needed to linger They weren't allowed to come and leave because the young people would have questions for them. And then young fathers, in addition to the prevention component that addressed all those topics, they were kind of then brought in for enhanced things about, what is it that you need? And so some of those young men that we worked with, we would buy warehouse, it seemed like warehouses. We had these closets that were about as high as these things, filled with diapers. And if they came and participated, the currency that we would give them would be a big bag of diapers. That's currency in teen mom circles. And so he would not be very welcome, but the moment we gave him diapers, he would show up and there would be a welcoming experience that he would enjoy. And that would give him a chance to interact. Also gave him a sense that he was actually doing something for his son or daughter. We had, there were societal perceptions, and we were doing a health clinic training one time. I was working with the Center for Health Training. We did a male-friendly clinic training, and we were sitting with these nurse practitioners and nurses who were sitting stoically because they were forced to be there. And I wasn't getting any traction. And I like to think that I'm a warm guy, and that I'm likable, but man, there was nothing happening there. And Amanda Newstetter, my co-trainer, who's more engaging and more warm, I said, Amanda, we're missing something here, right? And she's like, yeah, this is a tough crowd. I've never had a tough crowd. And as we were finishing, the light bulb went off. Nurse practitioners and nurses that work in family planning clinics had chosen this line of work for a multitude of reasons. They have a commitment to women's health issues. They have a passion to ensuring the reproductive health of women. They recognize that they came from a generation where what we have now was not taken for granted. And the final thing was they forewent financial gain to work in this profession, in this field. So how arrogant it is of me to walk in and say, and you have made this decision for all these reasons, and now I'm going to shift the landscape underneath you. You have to recognize that in this field, the people that have worked in this field historically have done so because it's a passion. And so we need to honor that recognition, and the way we were able to begin to understand that, get them to understand that they were also committed to the community's health. And if they are committed to the community's health and the health of women, they had to intersect with young men and men as well. What a different realization when we had the second training where they got it. And, I think it's important that, that those perceptions and norms are there for a reason. And if you are not respectful of those reasons, then you can always have that resistance. And it was a very wonderful realization for me to be reminded that I'm always learning about those things. We had to introduce community, a concept to the community to value young men as assets instead of detriments. And trust me, that is hard to do in communities. Because the young men that are successful are oftentimes seen as privileged. And then you go to certain communities and the only privilege that the young men have is that they have a probation officer and that they've oftentimes been expelled. That's the privilege that some young men have in certain communities. And so we had to kind of realize and work with the community. And then we had to build ongoing relationships with providers to maintain the partnership so that when we did referrals, that the partners were always kind of understanding that young men were going to go through the door. I could tell you story behind story about examples where you would make referrals and the boys would be sent right out of the clinic.